So right before the break and at the top of the show, we were talking about how different Pride was going to be in 2020. And to contrast that or to set it up, this particular article that I pulled from CNBC, I think does a good job. 2019 in New York hosted World Pride as well as the 50th anniversary. It honored the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, but then there was the normal Pride. So it was the World Pride and normal Pride. Those events combined maxed out the city's hotel capacity in June, and while an official report hasn't yet been published, it's estimated that last year Pride brought into the city's economy, at least for New York City, hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a pretty amazing thing. Fast forward to 2020, thanks to the event and all the cancellations of anything that any group, larger than 25 people, et cetera, because of the stuff that's going on. Now Pride has had to rejigger itself and go virtual, and I think there's some interesting solutions they're coming up with. But before we get to that, one of the reasons Tim and I wanted to talk about this was this has become very big business. It's a place where corporations can put a mark on things and say, hey, we support the community or we support diversity. This was not always the case. I remember going to my first Pride Parade back in the early 90s, it might have been, or late 80s. And it was it was an expression of we're here, we're proud. And it was the beginning, or actually the middle of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So it was a very different mood. And Tim, you remember when they used to stop the parade for the moment of silence. I mean, that was so affecting to have everything just shut down for a moment of silence and then start up again. You're like, wow. So it's gone from that, which is a very political statement and a very we're here, to this big kind of floats and handouts and how can we get involved, and so it's become big business, and a lot of people feel that is not the spirit of Pride.
No, and so many the big criticism and the criticism that both you and I have is it's one thing to be supportive in June, but you should be supportive all year round. And some of them say, "Oh, we have employee groups internally and so forth." But you and I have always challenged brands to say, "What's your consumer-facing message?" You can have one outside of June. So whether you make your cookies purple or rainbow colors in June and you ignore the rest of the year, why not let the consumer know that you're open for business for 12 months, not just in June? That's always been my frustration with a lot of these celebrations that happen just around June. You can see if you're watching on our video screen, we've got a list of a lot of people who have changed their logos and other brands that have developed products.
Tim, where did you find? Did you go onto the sites? I didn't realize that all these brands changed their Twitter and their LinkedIn and all these icons. I mean, yeah. I know a few, but that's a pretty big bunch there, huh?
And that's just a few of them with the iconography. And then there's another slide too that actually has. I was shocked to see rainbow Doritos. I didn't even know there was such a thing. We've seen the Oreos, but look at the mouthwash. But I had talked to somebody just recently, and I said this idea that there's billions of dollars out there for gay marketing. Maybe this is what the idea is, but as you and I know, it's really about connecting with customers rather than throwing a rainbow on something. So
yeah. So look, I don't. I see both sides of the equation. I think that the organizers of Pride or the Heritage of Pride here in New York City are always thrilled to have sponsors come on board and to make this a big event and a big celebration. I get that. But I also have lived the other version of it, which was a very at times it was a celebration, but then a very somber memory of for those that were lost to HIV and AIDS. And somewhere in the middle lies the solution, I suppose. But when it's one big party, it's hard to kind of dig down and say, why are we here? What's happening? This year, of course, with the event going on, they have to really rethink this in a huge way, because if you can't have in-person activities, what are you going to do? I thought one of the solutions they came up with was rather interesting, where it's going to be a big virtual event, and every hour or every hour or two, it's going to move around the globe, and it will feature guests and performers from that part of the world, which, when you think about it, it's a really good reimagining of it, because now it's kind of reminds me of Y2K. Remember how the New Year spun around the world? It was when Paris kind of really
Right.
In my opinion, that Eiffel Tower thing stole the show, but but then it would go to London, and then it would came to New York or whatever. And so this offered an interesting change. Of course, you're not going to be shoulder to shoulder with a lot of people and watching and experiencing this, but it's a different experience.
Well, what's a virtual event going to do? I don't like the idea of these virtual events. What are you going to do? Look at Are you going to look at a screen?
Yeah, you're basically maybe you could have a small viewing party, and if you're outside, you could have a patio, set up something, and people could be socially distanced, and you could watch the thing. But I just think it's a pivot that they're desperately trying to figure out how can we make this relevant and watchable and fun and different when you can't physically be with everybody, which I think that's why you came. That's why you did this. That's why I know people who would travel to the Chicago Pride or LA Pride or New York Pride, or then go to some of the smaller cities and towns to experience it, because it happens for a stretch of time. It's not just June, right?
Right. Well, I don't, it'll be interesting. I know a lot of people are also, a lot of the Pride organizations are teaming up with the Black Lives Matter protests as well, and some of them are combining the marches or the protests in the streets. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
Lining them, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I just think I understand we had to do virtual graduations for kids in school, but sometimes these virtual things, I just wonder, maybe there's something else you can do. I don't know, but I don't know what a virtual Pride event would be.
Well, you're going to find out.
Yeah.
Hey, I think we have Don on the line from Alabama. Don, are you there?
Hi, guys. Not my normal subject, but I will say, having done Pride events going back to the mid-'80s, I will take Doritos doing rainbow Doritos. I will take any of the corporate, involvement and engagement, because I can vividly remember police escorts for Pride parades, death threats, counter demonstrations. I worked on the quilt project. I remember when we used to carry sections of the quilt out for display, and the kinds of reactions we get. It astounds me that just last week in this country, the Supreme Court said, if you're gay, you can't be fired. And in this state that I live in, everyone I know who doesn't work for the federal government or a Fortune 500 company cannot be openly out because they are terrified of losing their job. And again, for us, just last week, that changed.
Yeah, Don, that is thank you for bringing that up, by the way. I always love when you call. You bring up an amazing point, because one thing I have never said, or maybe I've said it once or twice, going to a Pride parade in the late 80s or early 90s was quite the act of standing up and being out, because if a coworker saw you, it's exactly what you said. You actually had your career on the line when you did this. And now here we are in 2020, and finally the Supreme Court says, yes, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 covers this type of thing, from this type of job discrimination or firing from your job. You are absolutely right, and thanks for that insight.
Yeah, I just want to pass it on. And in Atlanta, Pride was bigger than the Super Bowl as far as total economic impact. Pride in Atlanta is massive. It is massive, and it is actually a full 4-day event. And it's not uncommon to have 300,000 people in Atlanta in Piedmont Park for Pride on Sunday.
Wow. So it sounds like well, you just read my mind. It sounds like the focus group needs to do a little visit to the Pride Atlanta. I think that will be, that's a good stake to put in the sand for 2021, since 2020 is turning out to be a transitional year. I like the word transition, but yeah, okay. Wow. Well, thank you for the call, Don.
Thanks, guys.
And thanks for reminding me about that, too. It was a very different time period, and I think that we all forget that, especially now.
Yes.
All right, Mr.
And
Bennett.
how brutal it was.
Yes, good point, Don. Thanks for reminding us of that.